It's incredible, isn't it? How a single tiny moment can set off a chain reaction that no one sees coming. How a simple splash at a family barbecue can spiral into financial ruin, a shocking betrayal, and even a criminal investigation that completely shatters a family from the inside out. Today, we're unpacking a story that starts so simply. It's about a man who, for just 1 second, decided he wasn't going to play along. He refused to be the butt of a harmless family joke, and in that single act of defiance, he accidentally pulled a thread that unraveled everything. He uncovered a hidden web of lies and a sense of entitlement so deep it would tear his entire world apart. The journey you're about to go on is a roller coaster of escalating drama, but the final truth, the reason behind a lifetime of hidden resentment, is something that no one, not him, and certainly not you, will ever see coming. Our story begins, as so many family dramas do, at a barbecue. You can just picture the scene, can't you? The smell of chlorine and charcoal in the air, the sound of distant chatter, and that feeling of slight reluctance. Our narrator and his wife didn't really want to go. They're child-free, and they don't particularly enjoy the company of his 2 sisters, or their husbands, or their kids. But after a little pressure from his mom, they went. When they arrived, the party was in full swing. The sisters and their husbands were already, in his words, solidly buzzed, drunk, really. His mom was overwhelmed, trying to keep a herd of nieces and nephews under some semblance of control. And his dad, well, his dad had made what he calls a strategic retreat to the whirlpool, armed with a cooler full of beers, a man who clearly knows how to survive these get-togethers. For a while, things were just normal, awkward small talk, a plate of food, a frozen margarita, but then the first sign of trouble. 2 of the kids suddenly make a run at a neighbor who was standing by the pool and shove her in. She stumbles, gets half wet, and is clearly unhappy. But the parents, the sisters and their husbands, they thought it was hilarious, great fun. They were setting a precedent, you see. This is what we do here. This is what's acceptable. A little while later, our narrator is standing a few feet from the pool, lost in conversation. From the corner of his eye, he sees it, a blur of motion. 3 of the kids running at him, full tilt. He knew instantly that he was next. It was his turn to be the joke. And in that split second, he made a simple choice. He wasn't going to play along. He wasn't going to get pushed into a pool and ruin his phone just for their entertainment. So, at the very last second, he just stepped aside, and all 3 kids, propelled by their own momentum, ran straight into the pool at full speed. For a moment, there was a stunned silence, followed by a wave of laughter from the other guests. It was pure physical comedy, but that laughter was cut short by the sound of outrage. The moms, who, as he mentioned, were pretty wasted, absolutely freaked out. And this is where the story truly begins, because their anger wasn't about what you'd think. At first, they screamed that he'd nearly let their kids drown, claiming 2 of them couldn't swim, a detail he would later find out was a complete lie. But then came the real reason for their fury, the truth of it all. It turns out, 2 of the kids had been filming the prank on their parents' iPhones, which were now sitting at the bottom of the deep end. And just like that, all hell broke loose. The 4 drunk parents were yelling at everyone, but especially at him. One of the brothers-in-law, in a state of righteous fury, jumped into the pool to try and rescue the phones. A mission that was, let's say, complicated by his body mass, index, and his blood alcohol content. It was a failure. The screaming continued, a chaotic symphony of blame and entitlement, until finally, the other brother-in-law, in the middle of yelling at our narrator, simply fell over and face-planted on the patio. That was their cue. The narrator and his wife left, but the fight was far from over. It was just changing locations. What happened by the pool was a messy, drunken shouting match, but what came next would be a cold, calculated demand sent by text message, and it would force his parents to reveal a secret that would change the balance of power in this family forever. The dust from the barbecue had barely settled when the first lie was exposed. The narrator's parents called him and confirmed what he suspected. The kids could swim, all of them. In fact, they used the pool all the time. The whole story about them nearly drowning, as far as it was a fabrication, a calculated move by his sister to make him look like the bad guy. It wasn't just a drunken mistake anymore. It was malicious. That night, the anger escalated. His sisters started a group text, and the messages were just vile, nasty, cutting remarks with their husbands chiming in to add their own insults. It was a digital firing squad. Our narrator and his wife, seeing this barrage of hate, simply blocked all 4 of them. They were done, but their parents weren't. The next day, his mom and dad, mortified by the texts, summoned the sisters and their husbands to their house. No kids this time. It was time, in his mom's words, to get some things straight and lay down some ground rules. The result was a phone call, an apology that felt hollow, contrite, maybe, but completely unenthusiastic. You can almost hear the eye rolling through the phone. The narrator, with his wife's steadying presence beside him, just accepted it. He told them thanks and that there was nothing more to discuss. He just wanted it to be over, and for a moment, it seemed like it was. Believing a truce had been called, he unblocked them. He thought maybe, just maybe, they could all move on, and that's when his phone buzzed. A new text message. It was from one of the brothers-in-law. It wasn't an olive branch. It wasn't another apology. It was a demand. A cold, stunningly audacious demand for the cost of the 2 iPhones now resting at the bottom of the pool. And a question: when will you be paying for them? And that was the moment everything changed. That was the point of no return. This was never about an accident. It was a shakedown. In that instant, our narrator knew he was done trying. He typed back a single word: never. He took a screenshot of the text, and he forwarded it to his parents with a simple final message. He told them he and his wife were done with the nonsense. They were going no contact, and they would not attend another family event if the sisters and their husbands were present. Then, for the second and final time, he blocked them all. He had drawn his line in the sand, but it was his father's reaction that would cause the earthquake. His dad, the man who had quietly retreated to the whirlpool, had finally had enough. He picked up the phone, and he didn't just rip them a new one. He dismantled their entire world. First, he told them the grandkids were banned from his house indefinitely. A serious blow, since their mom provided regular free babysitting. That got them rattled, but that wasn't the bomb. The bomb came next. With his daughters on the line, he calmly informed them that they were also banned from the family vacation house, and then he told them why. He revealed a secret they had kept for years, a secret that changed everything. The vacation house wasn't his and their mother's to give or take away, because the true owners were the narrator and his wife. The news, he said, completely freaked them out, and you can imagine why. This wasn't just about losing a place for weekend getaways. It was about losing a status symbol, a free pass, a core part of their entitled lifestyle. The ground had just vanished from beneath their feet. Their panic, however, wasn't just about losing a place to party. It was about losing something much more important. And as that panic began to set in, a much deeper, much darker financial truth was about to come crawling into the light. The sisters' panic. It wasn't just about losing a place to party. It was about losing a lifeline they didn't even know they were about to need. You see, to understand their desperation, you have to understand the strange financial fantasy they had been living in. Our narrator has been doing his parents' taxes for years, so he knew the truth. His parents were comfortable, but they weren't rich. In fact, he had quietly helped them out, even buying them their last car as a retirement gift. But his sisters, they had constructed a completely different reality in their minds. They were convinced their parents were secretly dripping with money, and that one day, a huge inheritance would be theirs, and so they spent their own money, with that safety net in mind, a safety net that never actually existed. And then, with the vacation house suddenly off limits, the dam finally broke. The oldest sister went to their mom with a confession. Her life was a house of cards, and it was collapsing. She and her husband were in serious financial trouble. Their credit cards were maxed out. Their car was about to be repossessed. The life of comfort they projected to the world was a complete illusion. And then, she dropped the real bomb, the reason for their panic. For the last 3 years, she had been running a secret business. She hadn't just been using the vacation house. She had been secretly renting it out, month after month, and pocketing the cash. We're talking thousands of dollars, $2,000 for a weekend, $4,000 for a week. A secret income stream built on a foundation of lies. And with her access cut off, her business was dead, and she was terrified she would lose everything. His parents, of course, were in no position to bail her out. They were stunned, and his dad was deeply pissed off, betrayed. They knew who the sisters would turn to next. A few days later, they showed up at the narrator's home. No husbands this time, just the two of them, waiting outside his door like vultures. It was an ambush. They spun a story about why they needed access to the house immediately, but then their true motive became crystal clear. They told him he'd been a terrible brother and that it was time for him to step up. They said he needed to plan on paying for their kids' college tuitions, because in their words, that's what family does. He just let them talk. He let them pitch their entire entitled story. And when they were done, he called them out on everything, and in that moment, the real hell broke loose. It was an hour of pure chaos, denial, crying, cursing, yelling. He said his ears were ringing for 2 days, and in the middle of that storm, after years of swallowing their drama, he finally snapped. He said some really mean and shitty things to them, but nothing that wasn't true. After they finally left, the weight of it all just crushed him. He said the drama had him beaten down. He had just enough energy for one last task. He got in his car, and he drove up to the mountains, and with a heavy chain and the best lock he could find, He padlocked the entrance gate shut, a final physical statement. But as he would soon realize, he knew a simple padlock wouldn't be enough. This wasn't just about keeping them out for a weekend. It was about securing a fortress. The padlocked gate was a powerful symbol, but it was also just the beginning. In the days that followed, the narrator's parents called him. They were exhausted, beaten down by the constant pressure from the sisters. They told him they were done managing the vacation home, done being the referees in a fight they never wanted. They handed the responsibility for the place entirely over to him. It was his problem now, and while he understood their decision, he couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment. This beautiful place in the mountains, it was supposed to be a gift for them, a place for their peace and enjoyment, and now it had become a battlefield. So he decided to treat it like one. He went back up to the mountains and he began to fortify. This wasn't just about locking a gate anymore. This was about building a fortress. He replaced the chain with a heavy-duty one, secured by the best lock he could find. He did a full factory reset on all the door keypads and created brand new codes that only he and his wife knew. Then, he had security cameras installed, high-resolution cameras that could see everything, day or night. He even put up signs, clear as day, stating that the property was under video surveillance. And for the final touch, a secret weapon, he installed a heavy-duty lockout on the main water valve, a hidden failsafe. If someone did manage to get in, they'd find a house with no running water. It wasn't long before his defenses were tested. He got a call at his office. It was the older brother-in-law, and he was furious. He had driven up to the house with a group of friends for a guy's hangout, only to be met by a locked gate. The narrator said you could just feel the humiliation and rage coming through the phone. The guy bounced between playing the victim and being aggressive, at one point even threatening to rip that gate out of the goddamn ground. He even had the audacity to say the narrator was ruining their business and should refund money to their guests. But then, the narrator made a move that changed the game entirely. He took the situation out of the family's hands and put it into the hands of a professional. He hired a man named David, a local property manager who lived in the area. David wasn't just some handyman. He was a former big city cop, a man who knew all the local sheriff's deputies. For a monthly fee, David would have access to the camera feeds and would do a physical check on the place every single week. This wasn't just a family squabble anymore. There was now a legal professional buffer, a witness, and for the first time in months, the narrator felt a sense of peace. That peace was strengthened by his parents, who, away from the pressure, came up with a brilliant plan. The sisters started demanding the house be open for Thanksgiving. It was a family tradition, they insisted, but his dad, knowing he'd say no, didn't even bother to ask. Instead, he and his mom made a counteroffer. They announced they would be happy to organize a big Thanksgiving gathering in the mountains at a rented Airbnb. All the sisters had to do was split the cost. The proposal, of course, caused a massive fight between the sisters. The middle sister was all for it, but the oldest one simply didn't have the money. The deadline came and went. The Airbnb was never booked. The narrator had built a fortress of steel and surveillance, and for a while it seemed to work. But he had underestimated the destructive power of desperation, and the lengths two men would go to with an angle grinder, a grudge, and the cover of a holiday weekend. For about 6 weeks, there was silence. The narrator thought things had finally settled down. His parents had just spent a peaceful week up at the house. David, the property manager, was keeping everything in order. It seemed like the worst was over. He said he was even starting to feel the pull to go up there himself, to just enjoy the quiet of the mountains. He had no idea that a storm was about to break. On the Friday after Thanksgiving, his two brothers-in-law got in a car and they drove to the vacation home. They came prepared. They used an angle grinder, a power tool, to cut through the heavy-duty chain on the driveway gate, damaging the gate itself in the process. Then they moved on to the house. They tried to force the front door, ruining the lock and gouging the wood, before finally breaking in through a utility door and another locked door inside. They even broke into the barn for reasons he still doesn't understand. They thought they were alone. They thought no one was watching. They had no idea that their every move was triggering a notification on David's phone. The property manager, miles away, saw the alerts. He pulled up the live camera feed and he watched the entire break-in as it happened. And then he called the sheriff. And this is the moment the entire story pivots. As the two brothers-in-law, finished with their work, finally walked out of the front door, they were met by a sight that must have frozen the blood in their veins. It wasn't an empty yard. It was David, the property manager, standing beside several sheriff's deputies. The realization must have hit them like a physical blow. The cameras, the manager, the police, they had walked directly into a trap they never knew existed. He said their first instinct was to try and bullshit their way out of it, but the deputies weren't buying it. Breaking into an empty house in a rural area is a serious crime. They were treated as serious criminals, and when the handcuffs came out, they completely freaked out. They started screaming, shouting about how they were going to beat the hell out of the narrator, a string of threats they were making foolishly right in front of the cops. The sheriff's office tried to call the narrator, but he and his wife were spending a quiet day with her parents. Their phones were off, tucked away in the car. They were intentionally in vacation mode, completely oblivious to the chaos unfolding in the mountains. So, with no owner to tell them otherwise, the police did their job. They booked the brothers-in-law on everything they could, breaking and entering, destruction of property, and communicating threats. The calls from jail started a chain reaction of panic. The wives freaked out, the parents were browbeaten, and our narrator's phone, when he finally turned it on, was a minefield of missed calls and frantic messages. The quiet, peaceful day had been shattered. The gloves, he said, were now officially off. This was no longer a family drama. It had become a criminal matter, and as the legal reality of the situation began to sink in for the brothers-in-law, sitting in a jail cell on a holiday weekend, their arrogant fury would soon curdle into pure, unadulterated fear, a fear that would lead to a final, desperate act of surrender. You can almost feel the shift in the air, the arrogant rage, replaced by the cold, quiet dread of real-world consequences. A few days later, a courier arrived at the narrator's office. Inside the envelope was a letter and a cashier's check for $5,000. The letter was an apology. A sincere one, he said. It was a total 180 from their past behavior. They acknowledged breaking in was wrong, promised to pay for any additional damages, and even agreed to a restraining order. They were desperate to get the charges dropped, admitting that a criminal record could cost them both their jobs. Especially the middle brother-in-law, who held a security clearance. The narrator, already in touch with a lawyer, suddenly had all the leverage. His attorney explained that a lawsuit would be long, expensive, and they might never see a dime. Instead, he recommended a settlement, a clean break. The brothers-in-law, when contacted, didn't fight it. They confessed they had a choice. They could afford to pay for the damages, or they could afford to hire a lawyer, not both. And with no real defense, a lawyer wasn't going to do them much good. They were ready to sign anything, to do anything, to make it all go away. So, the narrator's attorney drew up the papers, a formal settlement and mutual release agreement. It included a strict no-contact clause, no showing up where the other is, no communication except through lawyers. It also included a final, non-negotiable term. They had to pay his attorney's fees, another $3,000, and that led to the final tense scene in a lawyer's office. The narrator wasn't there. He was told it was a cold, curt affair, everyone on edge. At one point, when the sisters tried to argue about the legal fees, the middle brother-in-law, the one with the security clearance, the one who had the most to lose, reportedly snapped. He told both his wife and his sister-in-law to shut the hell up, or he was walking away from the deal, making his own peace, and the rest of them could all go to hell. And in that moment, the truth was laid bare. The alliance was broken. It was every man for himself. They signed the papers. They provided another check, and then they left. The legal battle was over. The criminal charges were reduced to a misdemeanor trespassing fine. A line had been drawn, not just between the narrator and his sisters, but between the sisters and their husbands themselves, a permanent fracture in the foundation. The war had ended, but the fallout, the personal and financial wreckage left in its wake, was only just beginning to be understood. The legal agreement was a ceasefire, but it wasn't peace. It was just the quiet before the final collapse. The first domino to fall was the oldest sister's finances. As predicted, her lifestyle, built on a mountain of debt and deception, came crashing down. Her husband's oversized, customized Pride and Joy truck, the one with the company logo tattooed on his arm, was repossessed, not quietly at their home, but publicly at his workplace. The humiliation must have been immense. That, the narrator said, was their breaking point. Soon after, they filed for bankruptcy, but their financial ruin wasn't contained. It began to poison everything around them, and tragically, it dragged their parents down with them. The narrator learned that his mother, worn down by weeks of guilt trips and manipulation, had caved. Worried her daughter and grandkids would be living in a hovel, barefoot and eating dirt, she did what she thought a mother should do. She drained her and her husband's entire emergency fund. She cashed out their small IRA. She gave her daughter $45,000, every last cent of savings they possessed, a final desperate gift that left her and her husband completely vulnerable, with nothing left but their pensions and Social Security. You can just feel the heartache in that, the quiet disappointment the narrator must have felt. But that wasn't even the most shocking part. As his dad recounted the painful story, he revealed something else, something so stunning, so unbelievable, that it reframed everything. He told his son that for the last 17 years, Since the narrator was in grad school, they had been giving both sisters a secret grocery allowance, up to $500 every single month for almost 2 decades. A secret river of money that had enabled their financial irresponsibility their entire adult lives. The narrator was just dumbfounded, and for his parents, that revelation, combined with the loss of their savings, was their moment of clarity. The fog of guilt and obligation finally lifted. The manipulation became painfully clear. His mom, he said, got angrier than he'd ever seen her. The parents got the sisters on a 3-way call, and it went south, fast. There were tears and gaslighting, and his mom just ripped into them. The next morning, his dad drove to the oldest sister's house, and he took back the car they had loaned her. The enabling was over. The bank of mom and dad was officially closed. The family had been financially unraveled, and the consequences were clear. A bankruptcy, a separation, and a deeply painful rift between the parents and their daughters. But the true emotional unraveling, the final hidden truth behind it all, was about to be revealed by the most unexpected person imaginable. Months passed. The silence was heavy, filled with unspoken things. And then an unexpected message arrived, not from a new, unknown number, but through his attorney. It was a letter, a long one, from the middle brother-in-law. The narrator, understandably, was hesitant, but his wife encouraged him to hear the man out. So he and his dad agreed to a meeting, and the man who walked into that lunch was not the same man who had broken into his house. He looked better, fit. He'd lost weight, he was sober, and he was in therapy. He was there to apologize, not just for the break-in, but for all of it, for everything he'd been involved in. He told them his arrest, seeing the flashing lights, the cold reality of the handcuffs, was a huge moment of clarity. It forced him to see the life he was living, the people he was surrounded by. He told them the dynamic between the 4 of them, his sisters, their husbands, had become completely toxic. He admitted that they were all, in his words, borderline alcoholics or worse, and that he finally realized he had to get away from that environment to save himself. That's why he and the narrator's middle sister weren't just separated, they were divorced. It was finalized. And then he hit them with the final truth, the one that explained everything, the one that reached back through all the years of holidays and birthdays, all the way back to the very beginning. Apparently, his sisters have hated him since before he was born. The words just hung in the air. He said my dad was literally speechless. The ex-brother-in-law explained that they liked things better when it was just the 2 of them. The narrator's arrival had shattered their world, and they had never, ever gotten over it. So they created a story, a narrative they repeated to each other, likely whenever they drank, for their entire lives. The story was that he was the favorite child, that his parents gave him more opportunities, that his success in life wasn't earned. It was a result of that favoritism. He didn't deserve it. And in that single heartbreaking revelation, the entire saga was reframed. It was never about a pool push. It was never about the iPhones. It was never even about the house. It was about a deep, profound jealousy, a resentment that had been festering in the dark for his entire life. The story ends, not with a neat little bow, but with a quiet sense of clarity. The family is fractured, perhaps permanently. The parents are spending more and more time at the vacation house, finding a peace there that was stolen from them for years. And our narrator, he's in therapy. He's processing the emotional weight of it all. He's learning to live with the knowledge that the anger directed at him was never truly about him at all, but about a story 2 little girls told themselves a long, long time ago. He's exhausted, but for the first time, he understands. It's easy to look at a story like this and just see the chaos, the anger, the arrests, the bankruptcy. But when we unpack it, what we find underneath all that drama are a few powerful and deeply human truths about how families can break. The first is the quiet poison of entitlement. You have to wonder, how did these sisters, now in their 40s, come to believe so strongly that they were owed a life they didn't build? And the answer, sadly, lies in that one stunning detail, the secret $500 a month grocery allowance. For 17 years, their parents had provided a financial safety net that wasn't just a safety net, it was a crutch. It prevented them from ever having to face the hard realities of adulthood. So when they looked at their successful brother and the beautiful vacation house he owned, they didn't see something he had earned. They saw something that should have been theirs. Their demands for him to pay for their kids' college tuition, because that's what family does. It was never about family. It was the final desperate cry of an entitlement that had been nurtured their entire lives. And that leads us to the
second, even deeper theme, the tragic dynamic of the scapegoat and the golden child. The ex-brother-in-law's final revelation, that they had resented him since birth, is the key to this entire story. It's such a common and heartbreaking
pattern in dysfunctional families. When people are unable to take accountability for their own choices, for their own failures, they need someone to blame. They create a narrative. And the sisters' narrative was that their brother was the favorite, that he got a head start they never had. It's a powerful self-deception, because it's easier to believe someone else had an unfair advantage advantage than to admit you made poor choices. In their minds, his success wasn't his. It was something that had been taken from them. And so, for decades, every time they tried to manipulate him, or guilt him, or take what was his, they weren't just being greedy. In their own twisted way, they probably thought they were taking back what was rightfully theirs. But finally, the most fascinating part of this story is how it was all resolved. The narrator's most powerful weapon was his decision to stop fighting. Think about it. He went no contact. He installed cameras. He hired a property manager. He let his lawyer handle the settlement. He rarely, if ever, engaged with them directly on their terms. He simply withdrew. He created a vacuum, and their toxic system, which needed a target, which needed an enabler, which needed someone to blame, suddenly had nothing to push against. He didn't throw a punch. He just let them swing at the air until they exhausted themselves and collapsed under the weight of their own dysfunction. It's a powerful lesson in how sometimes the only way to win an unwinnable fight is to refuse. And so, here we are. At the end of this incredible and honestly heartbreaking journey, from a petty poolside prank, something so seemingly small, to a family's complete implosion, we've just witnessed how a single moment, one person deciding to stand up for themselves, can be enough to unravel decades of hidden dysfunction. It leaves you with such a heavy question, doesn't it? At what point does our sense of family obligation end and our need for self-preservation begin? Where would you have drawn the line in this incredible story? We really want to know what you think, so please let us know in the comments below. If you appreciate deep dives into the dramas that define us and stories that truly unpack the complexities of human nature, make sure to subscribe and join the Reddit Unpacked community.